All right, today we're jumping into some really fascinating new research that takes a look at borderline personality disorder, but not just from the mind down. We're going to look at it from the body up.
So let's start with a feeling. In the source material, there is a patient, Anna, who often described what she was going through with this one phrase, burning on the inside. It's such a powerful way to describe that raw, overwhelming, emotional pain that's so hard to explain. And that's really the big question we're tackling here. What if that feeling of burning isn't just a metaphor? What if it has a real physical echo deep inside our biology?
To find that echo, scientists are starting to look beyond the usual places, beyond brain chemistry. They're digging into the body's hidden systems, the ones responsible for defense and repair. They're asking how our body's most basic reactions to pressure, the damage, to just being out of balance, how all that might be shaping our emotional health. Now, it's really important to say this is all pretty early research, but it's pointing to a completely new way of thinking about why emotional pain can feel so incredibly intense.
Okay, so to really get this, we need to wrap our heads around two key ideas that keep popping up in this research: the body's alarm system and something you can think of as internal rust.
First up, you've got inflammation. This is basically your body's emergency response team. You get a cut, and that redness and swelling you see, that's inflammation. That's the alarm system rushing in to fight off any bad guys and start patching things up. Normally, it's a brilliant, life-saving thing.
The second idea is something called oxidative stress. And honestly, the best way to picture this is like rust, literally rust forming inside your body. It's an imbalance that can cause real damage to our cells, and yep, that includes our brain cells. So let's put them side by side. Inflammation is that loud, overactive alarm system that's constantly screaming, "There's a threat." Oxidative stress is sneakier. It's more like a quiet, internal imbalance, that rust that's slowly causing damage from the inside. Either way, both can seriously mess with your body's whole system. So with those two ideas in mind, let's take a look at the clues that are starting to show up in the research. When you look across a bunch of different studies, a pattern starts to emerge. In people with BPD, researchers are finding higher levels of those alarm proteins floating around in the blood. They're also seeing that the protective enzymes, the ones meant to fight that internal rust, seem to be different. It all suggests the body might be struggling with just basic, everyday repairs. But, and this is a really big but, it gets complicated here. The picture is not perfectly clear. Some studies will link higher inflammation to things like self-injury, but then others show the exact opposite. The findings are all over the place, and that inconsistency is actually a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Which of course brings us to the big question, why? If this connection is real, why are the results so messy and different from one study to the next?
Well, the answer seems to be that BPD isn't just one single biological thing. Those messy results, they aren't a failure. They're telling us a much more detailed story. The biology might look totally different depending on someone's history with trauma, how long they've been ill, or even their specific ways of coping. It's a spectrum, not just one single dot on a map.
Okay, this is the most important part. How does all this science, all this talk of alarms and rust actually connect back to the feelings that people experience?
So, the theory goes like this. It starts with that fundamental biological imbalance we've been talking about, that constant, low-level state of alarm and internal rust. Now, this imbalance doesn't directly cause a feeling. What it does is it creates a system that's just more raw, more sensitive and vulnerable. Imagine having a background hum of irritation that just never, ever turns off. So what happens when your entire system is already in that raw, vulnerable state? Well, it starts to act like a giant amplifier. It takes a normal emotional signal and just cranks the volume all the way up, which leads to those much more intense emotional swings and that feeling of impulsivity. You can see how this underlying biology could directly fuel some of the toughest parts of BPD, the affective instability, those super rapid, intense emotional swings, the impulsivity, that feeling of reacting before you even have a chance to think. And it could even play a role in self-injury, which so often comes after a period of just unbearable internal tension. So when we put all these pieces together, what does it all mean? Well, it lets us tell a completely new story about this experience, one that isn't about weakness, but is about fragility. The common thread running through all this research isn't about personal failure or a lack of willpower. Not at all. It's a story about a biological system that's out of balance, and how that leads to a very profound, very real physical fragility. And this brings us right back to Anna. Her feeling that a small conflict was like pouring salt on an open wound. Suddenly, that makes perfect biological sense. Her system was already inflamed, already raw. The open wound was already there. The conflict, that was just the salt.
Ultimately, when we start to see emotional pain as not just a psychological event, but a biological one too, well, that has huge implications. And it leaves us with one last question to think about. How does this change our entire understanding of what it means to feel unbearable emotional pain?